And I'm like, wait, what?
This is India's #1 news network, and you're watching News 9, English news as it should be.
Hello there, thanks for tuning in to your favorite news destination. You're watching In Your Interest, and on the first segment on IYI, we try and decode the war that began to stop Iran's nuclear ambition. It seems like that red line is shifting because now the ceasefire talks between Tehran and Trump seem to be accommodating that very stance. So, is Iran now pushing United States to rewrite those rules? But even as we talk about that, the entire world is breathing a cautious sigh of relief. After months of high-stakes military strikes under Operation Epic Fury, a 2-week ceasefire has officially been reached between the United States and Iran. It is a fragile truce, with both Washington and Tehran calling this a victory. But it comes with a shadow that has loomed over the West Asia for decades: Iran's nuclear clock. While the fighting may have paused, the core issue that triggered this crisis is far from resolved: Iran's nuclear program. That's right. Let's first understand where things currently stand. Iran cannot build a nuclear weapon immediately, but its position today is stronger than before the conflict. The war began because the United States and Israel said Iran must never be allowed to build a nuclear weapon. America's clear red line was simple, it was firm. Iran had to make a permanent promise that it would never develop nuclear weapons. It had to completely stop all uranium enrichment inside its own country. It had to shut down its main nuclear sites at Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan. It had to hand over its entire stockpile of enriched uranium to the IAEA, the International Nuclear Watchdog. And it had to accept much stricter inspections and monitoring. But now, after weeks of fighting, the situation looks different. Iran has put forward a 10-point proposal. President Donald Trump has described parts of it as a workable basis, quote unquote. And we're talking about future talks. 2 of Iran's key demands stand out in that list of 10. First, full acceptance of Iran's right to enrich uranium on its own soil. And number 2, the termination of all IAEA Board of Governors resolutions against Iran. These demands were exactly what the original war aimed to stop, aimed to set out to stop. And Iran has already around 450 kilograms of uranium enriched, up to 60%. Experts say that if there are no strong checks, it could reach weapons grade level of 90% in just a few weeks. Turning that material into an actual bomb would still take several months. Iran's nuclear sites were hit during the strikes, but reports suggest much of the infrastructure remains resilient and could be repaired. And this brings us back to the central concern. The United States appears open to negotiations based on Iran's proposal. Enrichment rights are clearly penned down in the list of 10 conditions by Iran, and there are no clear new caps or promises to shut down the program. IAEA oversight could become weaker. Many analysts say Iran is now moving closer to becoming a threshold nuclear state, one that can build a bomb quickly if it chooses to. And amidst all of this global geopolitical churn, President Donald Trump is framing this issue through the lens of strength. In the wake of Iran's demands, he has spoken about a productive regime change, suggesting that A new leadership dynamic in Tehran is what made his deal possible, made this deal come to fruition. And he remains vocal about zero enrichment of uranium as the ultimate goal, and has even suggested a future where the US and Iran work together on a nuclear cleanup. He insists that the recent strikes have turned deep nuclear sites into dust and that this material must now be removed. Maybe US can help Iran on that front. So a lot of questions that we do need answers to. Some of them. President Donald Trump claims the goal is zero uranium enrichment going forward. But if the US is now talking based on Iran's proposal, is that goal still a reality or just a campaign slogan? With 450 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium already in Iranian hands, how can the US realistically enforce a zero enrichment policy without a total surrender from Tehran? And is that even possible at this point in time? If the US president is serious about zero enrichment, does that mean the US is prepared to return to full-scale strikes if the ceasefire negotiations don't result in the total dismantling of Iran's centrifuge? With us on the broadcast, Ambassador Veena Sikri, former Indian diplomat. Many thanks for taking on the time, ma'am. Professor Bharat Karnad, Emeritus Professor, National Security Studies, Center for Policy Research. Many thanks, Professor. Major General V.K. Datta, Defense and Geopolitical Expert, with us on the broadcast as well. Ambassador, let's get the snowball rolling here. Take it fast. A 2-week ceasefire with, of course, unresolved nuclear terms. We've seen the 15-point plan from US, the 10-point latest proposal from Iran. How stable is this arrangement really? 2-week ceasefire. Who's come out as a victor? What happens to this nuclear chess game going forward? Is this a pathway to a durable deal really, or just a pause before we see escalation again?
It seems to me to be very fragile indeed. I think it's already fraying at the edges, if one looks at it from today, because there have been attacks by Iran on Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline. That's already happened. There's been an attack on Iran, one of their oil storage depots, and there have been attacks by Iran also on Kuwait and other places. So that's one reason why it's obviously not even holding as a ceasefire in itself. And secondly, Iran has already said, because Israel has started questioning the deal to the ceasefire and is saying that the ceasefire is fine, but it does not apply to Lebanon. And Iran, in response to that, has said that if there's any attack by Israel on Lebanon, then Iran is going to attack Tel Aviv. So obviously there's another aspect which is going to lead to further fragility in the ceasefire, because Israel is in the midst of what they call their Greater Israel project. They want to take over land from Lebanon, to put their settlers there. So that's going to be a major factor. We also know that in Israel, Netanyahu is under huge pressure now from his own opposition, and who are blaming him and saying that he had nothing to do with the ceasefire. In fact, he was quite out of it. He really didn't know very much of what was happening about the ceasefire. There's something entirely that President Trump seems to have pushed through in response to his own internal pressure within America. Even the Army Chief, General Randy George, had been forced to put in his papers, and other generals really being so opposed to boots on the ground in Iran that they really, it was a kind of a internal, very fragile situation for the American Army and for the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. That's one. And secondly, we saw the faltering attempt between 2nd and 5th April to do what it seems to take out the enriched uranium. They were near Isfahan. The Americans sent in a whole lot of aircraft on the ostentatious reason of relieving that weapons system officer, or rescuing the weapons system officer. But in that guise, they were really obviously trying to get the enriched uranium out of Iran. But that failed. That whole operation failed, and they lost a lot of aircraft, they lost helicopters, and so that too has put further pressure on the situation within USA. So Trump has just agreed on this. You're absolutely right in your analysis that the terms that Iran is now putting forward in its 10-point program are much stronger than what they are said to have agreed to on the 27th of February, before the attacks began on 28th of February. The foreign minister of Oman, who was mediating the talks between Iran and USA, had spoken about some kind of a breakthrough at that time, and had said that Iran has accepted all the major conditions that America has wanted, saying that they'll never have a nuclear weapon, giving up all the enriched uranium and many other conditions. But then despite all of that, the attacks on 28th February happened, and the rest, as they say, is history. So Iran certainly is today in a very big, much stronger position. Both UAE and Saudi Arabia, who have been pushing America to finish off Iran, as it were, they're not going to be in the peace talks. I understand that the peace talks, which are supposed to start on Friday in Islamabad, are only going to have Iran and USA. Neither Israel is going to be there, nor are the Gulf countries, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and others going to be there. That's the present reports. I don't know if it will change in the next 48 hours.
Yeah.
So that leads to a very, very fragile situation, which could collapse at any time.
All right, so a fragile ceasefire, and the negotiating baseline, according to Madam Ambassador, is of course heavily tilting towards the side of Iran. Now, Professor Karnad, you're the nuke expert on the panel with us. If this IAEA oversight weakens, because Iran's 10-point clearly lists out that this governance resolutions by the IAEA, they must go away completely. So what happens to this oversight if it does indeed weaken? How does that change the nuclear risk landscape? And your assessment of this nuclear chess game that we've been seeing for the last 40 days? Pete Hegseth can say all he wants, that he is complete and finished all the military objectives that US actually set out to do. But it seems like Ambassador Madam just told us, that Iran has the ball in its court and it's in a stronger position at the point in time.
Well, look, let's start out by calling a spade a shovel. The fact is that you have Taco Tuesday. Trump always chickens out. That's what he did. This is America chickening out. And this is what happens when you, use bluff and bluster and hyperbole and lies as foreign policy. You end up getting caught out, meaning someone calls your bluff. Iran called their bluff. And this guy who promised to, civilizationally destroy Iran has on his face. So that's the main thing. Now, what is this interregnum between now and whenever the negotiations start? It basically tries, will attempt to give America an escape route, get the hell out by declaring victory, which Trump should have done at the very beginning and not gotten into it at all. But Trump is very mercurial in his foreign policy, and you have all kinds of confusion and complications being brought in by Trump, and even his own people pretty much admit they have nothing to say or do on foreign policy, because this guy just spouting off as he wishes when he is at the podium, and this is American foreign policy. So it has confused just about all the foreign officers of the world. Everybody is walking on eggshells. They don't know what he's going to say next. It's going to be the policy line. So the entire world, as it were, is on tenterhooks. But that said, the peace that is now there is not fragile. The reason I say it is because Iran has pretty much consolidated its position, despite what is evident in terms of the destruction it has absorbed, the massive destruction of its facilities, military facilities in particular. I mean, it's never had much of an air force, so discount that. It was 1970s Air Force. If you take it out, it was never much to reckon with. You have a Navy, which is again pretty, basic. So, but they still have the shore-based, flotilla, which is which are going to be very, very useful in taking out ships with their drone attacks, their missile and rocket attacks, and so on. So let's now discount that. At the end of a month of bombing, and really sustained and relentless bombing by Israeli and US aircraft, you have a situation where America is on the defensive and Iran is really on the offensive. It is where I think Tehran would have liked to have been, and where it now finds itself, which is to say, really, that it has all about 600 pounds, you can say 450 pounds or 600 pounds is the estimate of the fissile material that they have, locked away safe, secure, is the most heavily guarded thing under the Pasdaran dispensation, Pasdaran being the IRGC. And you have, that thing locked out, meaning they have not been able to reach the depths at Isfahan where the stockpiles are stored. They have not been able to destroy the Fordow underground facility under the mountains. So much of what the US talks about in terms of destroying the centrifuges is nonsense. They have the centrifuge sets very much there and very much secure. So they have all the capability to proceed if they wish to. And, by the way, let me also say, of the 450 to 600 odd pounds of fissile material, 60% enriched.
Yeah.
60% enriched material is still good enough for dirty bombs. It's still good enough for radiation diffusion devices. That's a technical phrase for dirty bombs. So if you're really, really push Tehran into a corner and say, well, then they're going to lose. I mean, whoever's going to do the push is going to lose, because they can craft what they have, dirty bombs out of what they have. And they've shown it. And they have the missiles.
So they're essentially no more a threshold state. They can still make a dirty bomb. That's what the nuke expert is telling us here.
Well, look, the thing about threshold is, when you say weapons threshold, the dirty bomb is not the weapons threshold, technically speaking. All I'm saying is what is theoretically possible out of enriched uranium. But the threshold is still 92% for an actual uranium or plutonium bomb.
But you're saying if Iran is pushed into a corner, it's going to be, decimating for the person who is the oppressor at that point, because they could come up with this, dirty bomb, even with 60% enriched uranium. General, let me come to you next. The Situation Room reports, and today there was an article on the New York Times as well that told us 6 big takeaways from the Situation Room, where Netanyahu was present. Foreign leaders aren't supposed to be in the Situation Room in the White House, but Netanyahu was present there, and he pretty much sold the entire idea of going in, and how the regime change angle was quite ripe for the United States to now come in. Now, take a look at this. Both sides are claiming that they are the victor. Tehran calls it a win. Washington says all objectives are met. Who holds the stronger hand at this point in time, before I go on to Madam Ambassador again? General.
Okay, Kabir, coming to your question, why did this war start?
Yep.
What is the trigger? 7 October 2023, massive attack by Hamas, roughly terrorist attack. 1,200 people are killed in one day. 250 plus are taken as hostages. And Israel retaliates. Retaliates starting with Hamas in Gaza. Subsequently, Hezbollah gets involved on behest of Iran, followed by the Houthis. And then there is a direct exchange between Israel and Iran last year during June. And then we had a ceasefire.
Yeah.
Now, the trigger point was the 7 October terrorist attack. And why was that 7 October terrorist attack engineered? You must be aware of that Abraham Accord, which we have been, it was going on, where a number of Arab countries were willing to become part of the Abrahamic Accord with Israel. Iran was not privy to that, was not in favor of that, and wanted the shift to break down. And the way to break down was to bring a divide between the Arabs and the Israelis, and then the Hamas attacked, and thereafter we've seen last 2 years Israel has been bogged down in Gaza, massive destruction, more than 65,000 officially killed, but unconfirmed figures say more than 85,000, and lakhs are wounded. And the end result, Hezbollah still there in Lebanon, Houthi still active in Yemen, and Iran and Israel had a previous exchange. And Iran demonstrated its capability and capacity of the missiles and the drone technology, which is a world class. The Russians have been fighting the war since the last 5th year running now by using the Shahid drone, which was given by the Iranians, and of course it's been modified and improved further. And now the Russians are given that improved technology back to Iran to enhance their own capability. So now that was a trigger Then we had a ceasefire in June, and then we had another round of people trying to impress upon Iran to stop the nuclear program and whatever on the behest of the Israelis, because the Israelis still had an unfinished agenda to get the leadership which was involved in planning the attacks in 7 October 2023. They decimated the leadership as far as Hezbollah is concerned, Hamas is concerned, large-scale attacks in Yemen itself in retaliation, and the leadership which was left in Iran was the Ayatollah Khamenei and the entire leadership of the IRGC. So they were able to achieve that on 28th of Feb, while the negotiations were still ongoing in Geneva. And that is where the Iran said that we cannot trust you. You carried out an attack on us unprovoked while we were negotiating, and we were almost on the verge of agreeing to most of the demands made by the US at that point in time. So now we come to this state now, 40 days of intensive bombing and attacks on either side and immediate retaliation by Iran. And Iran has shown them that in spite of having no navy left, in spite of having no air power left, which is decimated to a large extent, and few of them are still hidden in the tunnels, the Iranians had the capability and capacity to hit back tit for that immediately. And you can see the way it started after 28th of Feb. They have been retaliating on minute-to-minute basis, retaliating tit for tat. And Donald Trump made a statement, the Iranians are playing a much better chess game than them, that is the Israelis and the Americans. They were beating them in their own game. They were using the tactics, the asymmetrical warfare. They've used everything which is going to hurt the Americans and the Israelis. All their assets in the Middle East have been hit. They have been damaged to a large extent. And you can say that the Americans today are almost not in enough capacity to carry out operations from within their bases, which were there before the 28th of Feb. Their flotillas can't come closer to 1,000 kilometers of Iran, and they're carrying out standoff attacks. So ultimately, if we talk about this ceasefire now, the 10-point demand with the Donald Trump is willing to agree. If he's willing to agree and say that, okay, they are negotiable, why did they start this war? Was it the Epstein files? Was it the blackmail by the Israelis and the Mossad on the Americans? And they got the Americans involved in this in a big way.
Credible options, General, credible, options that you put on the table. My apologies, we don't have somebody from the Republican administration. It would be really nice for somebody from the administration of the Donald Trump regime to answer those questions. But pertinent points that you've raised over here. Ambassador Sikri, picking up from where General left us from, what Professor Karnad was also telling us, it seemed like Donald Trump wanted out. It wouldn't have mattered what kind of a proposal came from Iran. He simply wanted out of this. And comparing the US 15-point plan with the Iran's 10-point proposal, the core objectives seem to be diluted. About a fortnight back, the deprioritization of the Hormuz was one of those first key signals. And is this essentially a case of a tactical reset? Is this strategic compromise? What are some of the signals that the world should now be picking up at this point in time, even as we're already reading reports that the POTUS's cognitive capacity might be under question as well?
Well, that is an internal matter entirely for the USA to decide by themselves about their own president. But I think right now, when we talk of the Strait of Hormuz, it was completely open before the war began. I mean, on 28th February, there was no problem in access and egress from the Strait of Hormuz. But today, that has become a central talking point for President Trump, saying that he's been able to ensure it will be open and he's going to be there looking to make sure that it's open. But we know that Iran has categorically said that they are going to maintain control over the Strait of Hormuz, and they've said they're going to charge $1 per barrel of oil for every barrel of oil that goes through, and that's going to be their reconstruction fund money. Now, we know that both Iran and Oman, between them, control the Strait of Hormuz. Oman has, in fact, said that they want it to be an open exit, ingress, and egress. They don't want any kind of charges. So here, this is a matter that's going to be solved by Iran. There's no doubt that the Iranian army has control of that area, and it's something that is very difficult for the rest of the world because it means a permanent increase in energy prices and gas prices and oil prices if they're going to charge this amount. But America does not seem to be in a position to do anything about it.
Yeah.
That's the question. What will they do about it? He asked his NATO allies to come in and bring their ships and navies to make sure that they could keep the Strait of Hormuz open for free entry and exit. But that has not happened. Nobody has come. And I think it's a very difficult situation today for President Trump, because having agreed that the 10-point working plan of Iran is a workable document, he has given up a lot of the gains that seemed to be on the cards as of 27th of February. So that, I think, is going to be very difficult for him to walk back on. And I think that we see that this point about the enriched uranium is something that within Iran, they are highlighting this a lot, in their local press release, etc., that they're putting out. So obviously this is something very important, that they think it's a big victory that nobody's been able to take away their enriched uranium from there. And now they want all the sanctions to be lifted. They want the IAEA and others to just get off their backs, as it were. And it's a huge new ball game of demands from Iran. So in that sense, I can see what Mr. Bharat Karnad is saying, that it's not fragile at all, because from Iran's point of view, it's foolproof. It's much better than where they were on the 27th of February. But still, I mean, the question always is that if the talks break down, or if President Trump and Israel are going to use this interim period of 2 weeks and maybe a little beyond to recoup, to replan, to take on something else, to decide something even more drastic. That's something which we don't yet know about, because we know that in February, for example, all the time that the talks were going on, one round, then second round, then third round, it was used by Israel and USA to come together to plan what they were going to do and to build their joint strategy for the attack on Iran. But now that hasn't worked, and President Trump has obviously been forced by his internal situation to just take the off-ramp so quickly that there are many questions unanswered. But is this going to again be used to recoup? Is the firing going to start again? Is the bombing going to start again? I think it's just too early to say.
Yeah,
we have to
still early doors. That's absolutely right. I mean, General Dan Kane, who was earlier not in favor of any kind of invasion in Iran or any kind of war, he's also said that the joint forces remain ready. I'm running out of time here, but final, word to Professor Karnad. Professor Karnad, this war seems to have paradoxically legitimized Iran's nuclear stand and position. What's going to happen tomorrow at the Islamabad Accords, because both sides are going to be meeting there in Islamabad on Thursday. What's the gap between enriched uranium, sir, and actual deployable warhead? Help the lay viewer understand that. How critical is weaponization versus the 60% enrichment that we've been talking about here?
Well, look, it's not the technical thing. It's rather the belief in Tehran that they need to have an independent capacity to enrich if they care to. That's the principle that they are trying to protect. The actual mechanics of enriching it to 92% is not a big deal if you have the centrifuges working, which they are. So the other thing that you have to bear in mind when the negotiators meet tomorrow is the 10-point plan. The original was a 5-point plan that China and Pakistan had cobbled together. That has now been, taken up by the Persians, by the Iranians, and enhanced into a 10-point wherein they brought in all their issues. So I'm not sure how it's going to be resolved. That said, there's a military imperative with the United States to get the hell out, because as the PACOM commander, the commander Indo-Pacific has said, that if China were to start an affray against Taiwan today, I won't have the equipment, I won't have the forces to deal with it, meaning that the Americans are not ready to take on to the two-front war that they're talking about. They're barely able to manage Iran, with what they have. and with none of the allies. By the way, the allies' non-involvement is much more serious.
Yeah.
Spain, Italy, France have not allowed the United States Air Force to fly their planes over their airspace.
That's right.
It is extraordinary, meaning that all the bases, NATO bases in this area are not available to the Americans. So, they're in a difficult state, and you have to realize that they cannot continue with a very intensive campaign.
The EU nations and the EU statement was the first statement that urged and tried to prioritize the protection of the Iranian civilians as well. That was the first statement that came across. I need to completely wrap this up and shift into a break. Many thanks, Professor Karnad. General Datta, my apologies for not being able to come to you again, but we've been speaking to you heavily over the West Asian crisis and this conflict. And of course, the Islamabad Accords, they're just going to begin tomorrow. And like Madam Ambassador told us, it's still early.